This week, World Rugby announced that the 2027 Rugby World Cup in Australia would be the first to feature 24 teams. This is the first expansion of the tournament since 1999, when it expanded from 16 teams to 20. World Rugby chairman Sir Bill Beaumont was quoted as saying, "If we are to become a truly global sport, we must create greater relevance, opportunity, and competitiveness to attract new fans and grow value." Which is an interesting statement to make. In my previous video, I looked at which countries have progressed to the quarterfinals of the Rugby World Cup over its 36-year history. As I documented, this is heavily skewed towards those countries competing in the Rugby Championship and Six Nations, with those 10 countries earning 91% of the quarterfinal slots over the last 10 tournaments. And with France putting nearly a century on Namibia in their Pool A matchup earlier this tournament, questions about the competitiveness of the smaller nations have again been raised. To help put some perspective on this issue, I ran the numbers on the 339 pool matches that have been played at the 10 Rugby World Cups. To start with, across those 339 matches, the average winning score was 41.3 and the average losing score was 12.5, to give an average margin of 28.9. Of the 339 matches, only 4 matches have been drawn. France and Scotland played a 20-all draw in 1987. Canada and Japan have done so twice, firstly a 12-all draw in 2007 and then a 23-all draw in 2011. And more recently, Georgia and Portugal played out an 18-all draw this year. The largest winning margin was 142 points when the Wallabies defeated Namibia 142-0 in 2003. The largest total points in a match was the All Blacks' 145-17 defeat of Japan in 1995 for a total of 162 points. That's more than 2 points per minute, or a converted try about every 3.5. On the other hand, the lowest points in a match was the Wallabies' 9-3 win against Western Samoa in 1991. In terms of how close or lopsided matches are, I classified a match as close if the points differential was a converted try or less. I then classified a match as a blowout if the points differential was 4 converted tries or more. Using these definitions, 19.8% of pool matches, or about 1 in 5, are close, whilst 44.5%, or nearly 1 in 2, are deemed blowouts. With an average match decided by a winning margin of nearly 29 points, and nearly half of all matches ending with a winning margin of 4 converted tries or more, it does suggest there are quite a few mismatches in the Rugby World Cup pool rounds. But what have the trends been over time? Looking at the points differential over time, the 1991 Rugby World Cup was the most even, with the average points differential being 20.5. This then increased each tournament through to the 2003 Rugby World Cup, where the average points differential was 36.2. It then declined over the next 3 tournaments to a low of 23.9, before increasing again to 31.6 in the 2023 Rugby World Cup in France. This is the 3rd highest points differential in the 10 tournaments and the highest in 20 years. Close games and blowout games over time have a number of peaks and troughs in them, but it is pertinent to note that the average number of close games, 20%, and blowout games, 42.5%, in the 2023 Rugby World Cup are extremely close to the overall average of 19.8 and 44.5% respectively. Because of the concerns over the competitiveness of the smaller rugby nations, I classified the 26 countries who have participated in Rugby World Cups in one of 3 groups: established, mid-tier, and emerging. Established countries are Rugby Championship and Six Nation countries who have qualified for quarterfinals. These are the 10 teams involved in these tournaments, less Italy. These 9 countries are Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, England, France, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Mid-tier countries are countries who have qualified for quarterfinals or who play in the Rugby Championship or Six Nations and don't satisfy the criteria for the established countries. These 5 countries are Canada, Fiji, Italy, Japan, and Samoa. Emerging is everyone else. These 12 countries are Chile, Ivory Coast, Spain, Portugal, Russia, Zimbabwe, Uruguay, Georgia, Namibia, USA, Tonga, and Romania. The mean points differential between countries playing against another country in the same group are: for established teams, 14.1 points, mid-tier teams, 14.7 points, and for emerging teams, 12.3 points. These are all substantially less than the 28.9 points overall. However, it's when they play teams from a different group that the differentials start getting large. A mid-tier team playing an emerging team has an average differential of 20.7. An established team playing a mid-tier team has a differential of 30.1, whilst an established team playing an emerging team has an average differential of 42.7. Looking at trend data, 2023 was one of the closest years for the established mid-tier matchups at 23.6, but one of the worst years for established emerging matchups at 49.8. Turning now to the percentage of close matches. For those matches between teams from the same groups, the mean percentage of close matches are: for established teams, 31.7, for mid-tier teams, 41.2, and for emerging teams, 36.8. These are all substantially greater than the 19.8% overall. Now, the skew becomes really evident when they play teams from a different group. For a mid-tier team playing an emerging team, 28.6% of matches are close. For an established team playing a mid-tier team, 20.7% of matches are close. And for an established team playing an emerging team, only 4.3% of matches are close. The only trend data that's really worth commenting on here is that established and mid-tier matches are on the whole getting closer, with the 2023 Rugby World Cup being the best percentage on record at 37.5%. Finally, when looking at the percentage of blowout matches, it's not surprising that for matches between teams from the same group, the percentages are all quite low. For established teams, 13%, for mid-tier teams, 17.6%, and for emerging teams, 10.5%. These are all substantially greater than the 44.5% overall. However, the skew is again evident when they play teams from a different group. A mid-tier team playing an emerging team has 33.3% of matches as blowouts. For an established team playing a mid-tier team, 42.4% of matches are blowouts. And for an established team playing an emerging team, a whopping 74.8% of matches are blowouts. The likelihood of a lower category team beating a higher group team is also really rare. There have been 42 matches played between mid-tier and emerging teams. Mid-tier teams have won 33, or 78.6% of those matches, whilst emerging teams have won 9. There have been 92 matches played between established and mid-tier teams. Established teams have won 81, or 88% of these matches, whilst mid-tier teams have won 11. Finally, there have been a total of 115 matches played between established and emerging teams. Established teams have won 114, or 99.1% of these, with the only emerging win occurring when Tonga defeated France 19-15 in 2011. Whilst it does seem that the mid-tier nations are getting closer to the top-tier nations, the likelihood of teams not competing in the Rugby Championship or the Six Nations being legitimate contenders to win the Rugby World Cup is small. With fewer teams per pool, the additional 4 teams will be facing more of the established and mid-tier teams, which the current emerging teams struggle with. I find it really hard to connect the increase in the number of teams and pool format with the desire to increase competitiveness. World Rugby have also recently locked in the biannual Nations Championship from 2026, featuring the 10 teams from the Six Nations and the Rugby Championship plus 2 additional teams, likely Japan and Fiji. There will also be a second division, but no promotion and relegation until 2030. Current Samoan international and former All Black Lima Sopoaga has come out strongly against this structure. Is this a solution? What else could or should World Rugby be doing to foster improvements in competitiveness for those teams outside of those competing in the Rugby Championship and the Six Nations? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've got this far, thank you, and it would mean a lot if you hit the like and subscribe buttons.